Good morning. Welcome to Mirador Television and Break an Egg. Uh, Herding eggs, the herd instinct. And we follow it day by day by day by day. It doesn't matter what sector of society we're talking about, the herd instinct kicks in. Right or wrong, it's all emotional, no logic, and certainly no research into the facts behind any given matter. And that is now starting to come to light for some of the things that we've done in the recent past. Yes, the war rages. Yes, the war is beginning to come home. The war, at long last, is beginning to make an impact on not only the conscience of our politicians, our leaders, but also of the man in the street. My God, could it happen here? Some people are now beginning to ask. And if the trend of Putin threatening NATO's back door, threatening other nations around Ukraine, and his ambition or desire to recreate the old Soviet Union it carries on, then at long last, perhaps some notice will be taken. But behind those headlines is the herd instinct. And we'll take a look at a couple of examples that are now coming to light, and that voices of common sense are beginning to say, hey, come on, get a grip. All right, get a grip. I'm Keith Hayes. The mouth that roars. I become very unpopular with a lot of the things that I say. But if we don't have debate in our society, and believe me, it doesn't matter whether we are the mother of parliaments, whether we have the greatest debating chamber in the world, is those people pulling the strings behind that chamber love to take away our freedoms. And they indeed are trying again now. And the latest idea of trying to limit what can be said on the internet is already being exposed. Will that mean anything? No. It has to be seismic for anything to worry the people living in the bubble in Westminster. They don't care because they don't understand. They have no idea what goes on in the country that they're supposed to be, the society that they're supposed to be leading. I'll calm down. Let's look at the newspaper headlines, although they are much of a muchness again, and all looking at the war. Right, here we go. By the way, the day out there is rather nice. We're going to have sunny periods, a high of about 12 degrees. That's being fairly constant and it's fairly pleasant. A gentle breeze. The chances of rain are very slim. There are some chances there. The best of the weather will become after lunch. We'll have the sort of thing that we've got at the moment, scattered cloud and sunshine up until about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and then it will be a bit dour until about 2 o'clock, and the sun will start to come out increasingly as we make our way towards tea time. So that's what it's like outside. You don't have to worry too much. Wrap up a little bit because that breeze is still there, but it's nowhere near as cold as it was yesterday. The newspaper. Putin strikes bring war to the door of NATO. The latest activity over the weekend was that the attacks on various places near the Polish border, which is a NATO country, making even the dimmest of our leaders understand that all the talk about President Putin and his ambitions and what he will do and what he won't do, they've just obfuscated. They have decided in their own mind is he wouldn't dare do that. Well, he keeps on daring, and surely all the intelligence on this man and all the atrocities that he's pulled in the last 5 to 6 years. I think of Salisbury, the poisoning of his opponents. He wouldn't do that? No, of course he wouldn't. This man is dangerous. it doesn't matter that he's the leader of a big nation, a proud nation, and a nation that makes great contributions in many areas. But this man has just broken the bonds or the boundaries of civilized behavior. And if we don't think that he will be prepared to do it with some of the satellite countries, just because we say it's naughty of him, then we are kidding ourselves. And our leaders have been kidding themselves. And the Americans particularly have been kidding themselves. They have tried isolationism in the past. Stay out of it. No direct confrontation. So somebody like Joe Biden wouldn't learn anything from anybody. I'm afraid I haven't been a Biden fan ever since the last election, or at least even when he was put up as a candidate. He is old school Democrats, and if any group are out of touch with their constituents, it's the two American political parties. Interesting country, America. It's a fine country. It's an inventive country, an innovative country. It's a country that throbs with vitality and life, except in its politics. And there it is, biggest snout in the trough. I'll tell you just how far it leads. Here I am sitting in a small town in Sussex, in the southern part of England, and I'm getting into my e-box complaints from Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, or at least the former Speaker. Here I am getting stuff from her personal desk, right? How many more millions in various places in the world? Anyway, that's America, and they have opted to sit on the sidelines so far, and they've done that in the past to their great cost. Let's hope that this time it won't be to everybody's cost. Right, that was the I. The Times. War reaches the NATO border. Yeah, it has. It's reached the NATO border, but it's reaching our borders too. Friendly nations who have been taken into the European Union, are very near to where Russian activity is taking place. And that Russian activity continues. It's much slower than anybody thought, including Mr. Putin, I understand. But it's inexorable. It is marching forward. And it's not just Ukraine now, apparently, that is under the direct target of President Putin. Some of us have always known that. Why? It's been self-denial for a lot of our leaders, and apparently the Americans still. But here it is, the reality is here. The Daily Express, Putin's missile strike brings war to NATO's border. Everybody's very careful to say it's to NATO. The fact of the matter is, it's also to a club to which we belonged until recently, the EU. And actually, the Mirror is much more straightforward. The West in his sights, it says. And basically, it is saying the latest missile attacks are just 6 miles from the Polish border. Poland, one of the first, very brave people, the Poles, but they were the first people to undergo the strict economic conditions to get entry to the EU. They did extremely well, and they were sneered at by a lot of people. But here they are now in the front line. They were in the last war, World War II. I wonder if history is repeating itself. But if I was, well, I am who I am. I woke up with some alarm this morning. And I don't mean get up. I mean alarm in my mind that things are getting out of control. And once things get out of control, the obvious, they're uncontrollable. In other words, events just take place. And God only knows what that could mean for our society, our country, and our freedoms. Right, okay, that's the Mirror, the West in his sights. The Sun, Putin blitz on the NATO border. Same story, really, slightly different angle. Even the Financial Times, Russian strike at Western Ukraine base sends the warning signals to NATO. Well, despite the fact that people like me and and me, not just like me, are big loud mouths. But we need loud mouths to try and alert people to let us at least think about where this war is going. Because everybody is just sort of treating it as if it's a sports spectacle somewhere else, not really much to do with us. Yes, we got graphic pictures of refugees. We are now being asked, will we open our doors and take refugees in? Or all the right things. But there is a sense of not realizing what's happening. The fact is, we are at war, and the enemy is advancing. And if we don't do something about it soon, he will advance faster and further than we ever thought possible. And then what do we do? It's not like Brexit. It's not like COVID. It's not like the icing cake in Westminster. You can't sit down and say, oh, dearie, dearie, dearie me. War means winners and losers. Real estate, if you want to call it that. Territorial gains. Gains already, it would appear, that Putin has got a puppet leader for Ukraine in mind. And I bet you he's got a puppet leader for every other country, including ours. Ooh, tut, 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 tut. What we can do is we can sit down and we can discuss it, can't we? No, we can't. The sooner we realise that this is a critical situation that we're in, the better. All right. People will say, well, they're not that idiotic in Westminster, are they? They seem to be that idiotic in Washington. But one would hope that what we see is not the reality. One would hope that there is the same realisation that I'm expressing. This is a dangerous situation in Westminster, and that our actions and activities, although perhaps not being seen, are appropriate to the situation. Appropriate to the situation? I remember that from Scrooge. The Daily Telegraph. US warns Putin as he takes a war to the West. The United States sort of said, hey, stop doing this. The Americans haven't said anything more than you naughty boys, stop it. That's all they've said. And we've been saying that ever since, what is it now, this 18th or 19th day, we've been saying that for 19 days. We were saying it before. Don't you dare, don't you dare. Well, he's dared. And every time he dares, we say, oh, don't you dare. It's hardly the sort of thing that a man like Putin understands. You can say boo to him and he'll say, oh dear, and immediately go and boo you out of the court. The Guardian, Russia escalates war in Ukraine with attack close to NATO border. There we go, another headline. When the newspapers are more or less in tune, then you know that the story is a big one, but also there is at the centre of it, at the core of it, an element of fact and truth. The Metro, the London paper, refugees need you. They're concentrating on the fact that we need to put refugees somewhere, and that British people are being asked to open up their homes. I haven't got the details, but it's expected that there's going to be some financial support to local councils so that they can help the new refugee homeless. Since they can't help the present homeless, it doesn't seem to have sunk in either into Westminster. We'll probably find people all over the place. And it's suddenly become a cause célèbre. And those people who have cheered on. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take refugees. On the contrary, some of these people need help. We need to determine which people. And how are we going to handle it? And just, once again, throwing it to the shires, throwing it into the let's give it cash type situation is not much of a strategy and not much thinking. Right, okay. The Daily Star. Vlad's Roid Rage. What's that about? The world's elite spies, new claim. Ailing despot in last gasp war. Grave change over the past 5 years. What they're saying is that Putin is ill, and that the reason for this particular time of attack, if you like, is to do with two things. One, that his mind is slightly unbalanced, not a madman, but nonetheless affected, as some of us are, by long-term illness, and that he has been actually diagnosed with some form of cancer. Are they right? Well, it's difficult to tell. We don't have access to Putin's medical records. But we, I think, need to worry that this man does not stop, and that all the words in Christendom, or outside Christendom for that matter, bounce off him, as someone we once famously said, like a duck's water off his back. There we go. Those are the headlines. Not a pretty picture. Let's go on to one or two other things now. Because first of all, tucked away a lot of other things which in many ways we've lost sight of because of the headline news and the fact that the war captures the main stories and the front pages, and for that matter the headlines in television and radio. But there was there was a drama over the weekend. I didn't watch it all. In fact, I only watched really the first part of it, and it was really about Bloody Sunday, and the trigger to, some believe, the armed conflict in Northern Ireland way back in 1968-69, and the incident was that the British soldiers shot dead 13 or 14 civil liberties people, and particularly when they were trying to rescue others who had been hurt. It was a very sad, sad day, and believe me, my heart goes out to those people who were trying very hard as civil libertarians to bring some sort of assistance in Derry or Londonderry because of the turbulence that was going on, and that they came under fire from the British Army and their lives were lost. Down the 25, 30 years since then, much has been made of this. But you know, one of the things that we tend to do, and the herd goes with it, is herd instinct is, wow, these soldiers were naughty. It was all the fault of the British Army. And that becomes a popular myth, picked on by playwrights and television authors and so on. But you know, the funny thing is that observers who write these things have rarely been on the spot. So when I speak, I can tell you, it wasn't 1969. Well, I was there in 1970. I was there briefly in 1970 in Northern Ireland. But then I went in 1975 permanently for 10 years, 15 years in fact. So got a good feel for what was happening around me and how people reacted to given situations. And I got to know the army quite well because I was a journalist and I was interested in all sides of the argument. And one of the things that we tend to think is, because soldiers are very well disciplined, under withering enemy fire, if a soldier is told to go over the top of the trenches, as the First World War proved, is he follows discipline and he goes, knowing full well that he'll be killed. shot. Well, the soldiers in Northern Ireland were under the same sort of stress. They weren't automatons. They weren't militaristic. In the main, they weren't bullying. I mean, you'll always have exceptions. They weren't bullying the civilian population. In fact, as one said to me, we originally came just to keep the prods from beating up on the Catholics. And who turned on us first? So there is a heart that beats in every last soldier. And that heart brings fear into their minds. And if you want to know what fear is, go out with the British Army, or you can't anymore, of course, but I did. I went out on patrol with the British Army one night, and I've never been so scared in all my life. I was really scared. The soldiers put a brave face on it, but they knew that going through the dark maze of terraced streets in Belfast, that may be the last thing that they would ever see. They were so brave, they were so heartless, or whatever, that it didn't impact upon them. Of course it did. Of course it did. So when, as the herd, we decide that we will prosecute and go after people who made decisions under those circumstances in Northern Ireland, or for that matter, anywhere else, and that we will bring them to court, nobody bothers to add into the mix the fear that goes through a soldier. Soldiers aren't frightened, are they? They put a pretty good show of not being, but they are. They can't help it. They are human beings. And what have we done? We've gone after them. We've decided that their actions on the spot, when you're frightened, and really frightened, and believe me, as I've said, that was my first real taste of fear. Or you can say I was scared of this or frightened of that, but real fear. And I did it for 24 hours. Well, the initial one, when I went out on the streets to patrol with the Gloucesters, I think it was, the Gloucester Regiment. When we went out onto the streets, that fear they faced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for many months on end. And then, if they made a misjudgment, if they made a mistake because of fear, 30 years later, we decide to prosecute them, to go after them. Well, that's not good enough. And if, in fact, what happens that we get into a war in Ukraine, it's about time that somebody started to put it into the equation straight away. Our soldiers will be frightened. Not frightened to the point where they won't do their duty. Not frightened so that they will run away. But every time they make a decision, it's done under fear. Now you try it. Just be mildly frightened of something and make a decision. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody not knowing that they were either frightened or stressed, and they apparently are not paying attention to what you say? They're trying very hard to have a conversation, but they can't. And it's because of this fear. And if you haven't tasted it, don't pass judgment on people who make decisions when they are in those circumstances. Yes, of course we've got to be careful that people don't do awful, illegal things because of their position. But I don't know that too many B specials, as they were known, the volunteer reserve, as it were, in Northern Ireland, I don't know that too many of those were hauled before the courts or have been investigated. Because politically, it wouldn't be nice, would it? It would be upsetting. But if you haven't got a level playing field, then What do you expect? It is not fair. It is not just. And that injustice has seeped over into our society. Now, some of the things that are coming to light is the police, at long last, the retiring chief inspector of police, has started to say our present constabulary have got it wrong. First of all, they must not indulge in thought crime. If, in fact, in your mind, you are anti-feminist, that you actively believe that women are inferior in terms of handling society, and you say so, should that be considered a crime? Because that's where it's nudged recently. It may be offensive, it may be distasteful, it may not even be true, but should you be hounded legally for that sort of thing? And the chief inspector of constabulary is saying, don't create these thought crimes, because it gives way to excesses. And the herd, because the herd follows, primarily what it's told is the herd follows creating situations such as the hounding of leading figures for being paedophiles, something which eventually is proved to be absolutely ridiculous and should have been seen like that by the police in the first instance, but wasn't, and everything got carried away. Very naughty. It's very naughty indeed. There is more of that. These witch hunts have become almost something that Scotland Yard particularly have thought up and have gone after with great glee. And the Chief Inspector of Constabulary has said, don't do it. Don't create a new set of crimes, particularly when in fact there is no legislation to support that position. But he also points out that the police forces are wrong to ignore the other end of the scale. That police should be following up burglary and not putting it down as petty crime. They should be following up domestic abuse and not putting it down as just a record. That is wrong, he says. The police should be chasing up as much as they can. All right. Police supporters will say, well, how many hands do you think we've got? How much money do you think we've got? But it's not a question of the cost, the funding, the support. What it is a question of a mindset. If you start to think that way and you actually persuade the public to go along with it, the herd instinct, then indeed it will happen and it will be counterproductive to our society. Oh gosh. Let my usual little break, because it's all very well for me to rant and rave the way I do, but I like to just take us to one of the nice, calmer parts of Lewis, just for 30 seconds or so. it's just a lovely park. And when I really want to get away from things, there is a thing called the Notts Garden there. It's a secluded little garden within the park. And it's where you can sit and quietly contemplate, because it is cut off from the rest of the park. Most people don't even know that it's there, but it's a pleasant little spot. But while we're talking about witch hunts and how we can get things wrong, is at the moment there is a big witch hunt against the oligarchs. The oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs, the people who have made filthy amounts of money, as if some of our people don't, and who have parked themselves in the West. And to get at Putin, our government and other governments have decided this is the soft underbelly of Russia. Freeze their assets, attack them. Well, maybe it's the right strategy. I rather have my doubts, but nonetheless, maybe it's the right strategy. Who am I to say that it's the wrong strategy? The only thing is we've suddenly discovered it. And one of those that was named the other day was Lebedev, who is a Russian oligarch. And what does Mr. Lebedev own here? The Evening Standard. And who was the editor for a while of the Evening Standard? George Osborne, the former politician and cabinet minister. Isn't that strange that we allowed all that? And indeed, actually, that newspaper does hold the franchise for, well, it did, because I think that whole scheme of local television has collapsed. And you could almost guarantee that it was going to. It was a nonsense. But Lebedev is somebody that we are now told is a pariah. He's a pal of Putin. He owns one of our key evening newspapers. He owns one of the local television stations. And he's done that for at least 7 or 8 years. And one of our leading politicians went to work for him. I don't hear too many people shouting about that at the moment. But if we're going to go after the tycoons for one thing, then we've got to make sure that that's widespread across the board. And it's not. We pick and choose. And we can't pick and choose. If we have a principle, if we want an exception, what we've got to do is to make a very, very good case for that exception. Not just decide to ignore it. Or go after the perpetrator, Lebedev, and then ignore the other people that were involved. And there were some very notable journalists who worked for the Evening Standard, who do work for the Evening Standard. So are we guilty of double standards? Are we guilty of some things we get outraged about and others we ignore simply because it doesn't fit in to our way of thinking? Surely consistency is one of the most important things in our society. And we don't seem to be very consistent. Well, I've been a bit all over the place this morning because the war is getting the headlines. The war is getting closer and closer to home. The war is getting uncomfortable. And yet, go into a pub, listen to the chit-chat, which is a good marker, and there is still no sense that it isn't anything other than a football game being played out on the continent of Europe. There's no sense that this is people really are being killed and buildings demolished. Oh yes, we get graphic pictures, and yes, people demonstrate. But the way that you defeat these things is with conviction, and I can't see any conviction. I can see people waving flags. I can see people holding vigils. All very nice. But that's it. They do it a bit like the food bank. If you want to cure poverty, hold a food bank. Yeah. Well, doesn't wash much with me, I have to say. It doesn't wash much with me. Oh yeah, I'm not suggesting that people don't hold food banks. On the contrary, I'm not suggesting that people don't hold vigils. But it must not get into our mindset that this is the way to attack a dictator. And that's what Putin is, despite the fact that he would argue he's democratically elected. The mindset is that we've got to stop this man at all costs. Not that what we do is we allow the world or our fellow citizen to see how we can protest. What is it? The same. Me fears he protesteth too much. And I think that probably our society is protesting too much. Instead of supporting some idea that perhaps a tank or two might make all the difference, particularly as the Russian army has shown that it is not invincible, that the brave Ukrainians have actually fought against it and stopped its advance, that there is a man who has ambitions and may not be able to fulfill them if, as with most bullies, the group, the herd, stands up to him instead of dashing off, chasing various vague ideas like thought crime. It reminds me of Nero fiddled while Rome burned. A lot of things to think about. And I jammed far too many into one short program this morning. But why can't we think for ourselves? Why is it that we have to be spurred by nonsensical politicians? And at this particular moment in time, I would say, yes, nonsensical media as well, because much of the media has gone along with the herd instinct. Now, how can I sit here and talk this way? The reason I can is at the moment, we broadcast over the web. It's becoming an increasingly popular way of people, particularly younger people, watching television or video or communications of many sorts. But we have before Parliament at the moment something called the Online Safety Bill. We argued, be careful when you pass these sort of things, is there some bureaucrat somewhere that is going to try hard to impose strict letter of the law and do away with programs like this, where we criticize the status quo, we criticize the people controlling or governing our society. Mirador Television boasts that it is independent, and it's costing us. We hope that you'll help on that, by the way. But we are independent. We can do this thing. But it may be that the Online Safety Bill, which puts pressure on the operators like Facebook, YouTube, to be the guardians, to err on the side of caution. And one group have tested it now, and they posted some various sayings which were removed by Facebook and YouTube and so on for being inflammatory and against the law and so on and so forth. Well, they weren't against the law to begin with. But what were these sayings? Who were the evil voice that said something that was harmful to our society? Well, none other than Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and other leading politicians and figures. These were posted. They'd already made them some time ago. They've been floating around our society for some time. And suddenly, the algorithms or logarithms or whatever the hell they are have been now tweaked to the point where they are stopping what essentially is free speech. And that is dangerous. That is really, really very dangerous. And that is something that we need to focus on. Okay, a lot of stuff that comes out of the war, for instance, is quite secret and needs to be. You don't tell the opposition publicly, this is what we're going to do, chaps, so prepare yourself and get the worst, ready for the worst. You don't do it. Of course you don't. There has got to be a certain amount of secrecy. But this is really talking about taking stuff off that somebody somewhere just doesn't like. Who thinks that it is not nice to be posted where everybody can read it. Well, the chief chief inspector of constabulary says, stop creating these thought crimes. It's counterproductive to society, and it's almost impossible to be treated in a just fashion. So the online safety bill has got to be defeated. It's got to be resisted at all costs, so that we don't suddenly find ourselves in a society that is scared to say boo, because that's what the old Soviet Union was about. And it's still what many, many societies that are despotic are still about, afraid to actually lift an eyebrow. And most people, I shouldn't say most people, many of us have passed on. I haven't yet. Many people would love me to. But we remember, it was first-hand what had happened in Germany in the Second World War, prior to the Second World War, that the despotic Hitler had made thought crime culpable. That didn't make sense, that sentence. But since I'm operating without a script, I think you know what I mean. In other words, you are breaking an unseen law if you thought in a way that's different to the leadership. We can't have that. We really can't. Well, there we go. That's the morning. What time is it? Oh, it's coming up to let's get the 8:46, about 1:45. The day promises to be a difficult one for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is you're suddenly going to find that the bills come in that they are far more than you expect. And have you got enough in your bank account? Yeah, some people who will have healthy bank accounts and it's not going to bother them. But there are others who already are living on the breadline, or at least are living so that they can just manage a decent sort of life with their budget. That's going to be hit. And it's going to be hit more and more and more. The more that the war in Ukraine, the war in Europe, rages. Well, I would like to say that I enjoyed my rant this morning, and I haven't really. I just found that there were so many issues that the conviction that I often bring to this slot, the passion, right or wrong, not saying that I'm always right, often I'm not, but I found it difficult to start to rant and rave this morning simply because most of the issues that I mentioned as are coming to the fore could have been addressed 5, 10, 15 years ago, and we wouldn't now be looking at a society plagued by them. That's not good enough. It really isn't good enough. It was Boris Johnson who, in his keynote speech, as I keep reminding everybody, and this isn't pro-Boris outburst, it's just that it made a lot of sense. He made a speech just before the last election in which he said, our present system of governance is not suitable for purpose. We need a root and branch reform. Politicians hate the word reform. Even Boris isn't going to force that one through. But he didn't have the chance because events overtook him. So our imperfect society will continue, and it will get more and more imperfect when those who are in a position of authority and power use that to make sure that their way of life isn't changed, while all around the rest of us, life is changing at a huge rate of knots for a whole host of reasons. And let's not forget COVID. But there we are. That's our society. Just a reminder, at 8:49, in other words, coming up to 10 to 9, that the weather out there is quite nice this morning. Scattered cloud with sunshiny periods, getting better this afternoon. Not much chance of rain, and the breeze is light. Okay. Talk to you later. And when I say that, we do keep an eye on what happens throughout the day, particularly when we're in a period of militaristic activity, let's put it that way. And if anything really, really dramatic would happen, you know that our small viewership as they are, we'll get to know it just as fast as if you were watching one of the big boys. Okay. I've got to say toodle pip. And why not? Do I seem weary? Do I seem bowed? Yes, I do, in many ways.